Welcome to the 10X Blueprint Podcast, your guide to unlocking 10X growth through AI, AR, and Web3. Join Simone Knight, billion-dollar media strategist and founder of Brandiverse Marketing, for discussions with industry leaders about harnessing the power of tomorrow's technologies today. Let's step into the Brandiverse. Hello, and welcome to the 10X Blueprint Podcast. My name is Simone Knight, and I am your host. Today, we will be talking about AI readiness. AI is a big buzzword. A lot of companies are talking about it, but how many companies are actually doing it, and then how many companies are doing it well? So my special guest today is Samira Golsfid. So she is the VP of Data Science at 6sense. She's a powerhouse in AI innovation with over 15 years of experience. She's led AI NLP projects that have tripled productivity and boosted revenue. Previously, she was at PayPal, where she built AI systems safeguarding billions in transactions. She also co-founded an AI company in Iran, working with several clients like the UN, which she has a PhD in industrial engineering. And Samira, to do all of that, is driving transformation and empowering teams with cutting-edge AI at 6sense. So let's dive in and let's meet our special guest today, Samira Golsfid. Samira, how are you?
Hi everyone. Thank you for having me.
Well, I'm so excited to have you on the 10X Blueprint podcast because I've barely been focusing on AI readiness because, as I said, a lot of companies are talking about AI, but not a lot of companies are actually doing it, and then not a lot are doing it well. So I'm super excited to have you on today because I know you have this amazing framework for readiness, which we definitely want to talk about. And we want to talk about just some of the best practices you've seen, some of the pitfalls that are easy for people to fall into, which I call trap doors, and just basically talk about how leaders who are looking to make that digital transformation, that leap into AI, how they can do that with confidence.
Sounds amazing.
All right, ready. So first of all, before we get into the topic, I always like to do some fun questions so that my audience can get to know who my special guest is and get to know a little bit more about them as a person, right? So I like to do some fun little things. And so one of my first questions is, have you ever had a cringe moment at work? Okay. So what I'm talking about is a moment where maybe you've mistakenly sent an email to like the entire company instead of just like one or two people. Have you ever had that happen to you?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. Yes, I had a couple. I remember I accidentally forwarded an internal message about the customer issue to the
Mhm.
customer themselves. So it was usually you don't want to actually tell exactly all the details. But then I contact them, explain, and apologize. But if at that time, for example, we had the AI tools that can help to check the recipient list before you send this. So it could be super amazing that you are not sending a sensitive email to the people that they shouldn't receive it.
Oh my God. I think that cringe moment is one that probably a lot of people would resonate with. And I definitely did the same thing. I sent it to probably about 30 people. In fact, I intended to send it to like only two people, but I was able to quickly pull back the email. But that only works when you're on the same network. That's one. So I couldn't get everyone back in the email. But that was early on in my career, and I was just ready to pass out. So now I have like email PTSD, right? When I'm trying to send a sensitive email, I'm like triple checking the email list, and it's just, oh my God. That's an interesting thing. So is there another moment that you would say might be like a career cringe moment that you really wish that you can pull back? Do you have another one?
For the email
Hmm.
cases,
Well, no, in general,
oh,
cringe moments.
yeah, another one, I wanted to have a conversation about the performance of a person in my team with HR. So, and the title of the email was reviewing the performance and make a decision. So, again, I sent it to everyone in the company. And then it's a very sensitive topic. The good part is that the name of the person, it wasn't in the topic. But then I sent a clarification message to everyone. But this is another one.
I think that one might have even trumped the first one. So you heard it here, folks. AI could have helped to check the recipient list before you send it. And then that would have avoided that cringe moment. Okay. All right. So let's get a little bit more about you now. So, I mean, you've had an amazing career, and really, I should have introduced you as Dr. Samira Golsfid, right? Because you do have a PhD in data science. Tell me about that. I mean, what were some of the career options you considered as a child that then you now ended up in data science? Did you say, okay, I want to be like a firefighter or an astronaut or a nurse? And then it's like, nope, data science. Or were you always on this track?
So, believe it or not, when I was a kid, I wanted to be a scientist. I was inspired by the cartoon Dr. Balthazar. I don't know if is it
I don't think I've ever seen that.
But yeah, you can Google it. So the main character was a scientist and it's really inspiring me. And I spent the hours playing with calculator, trying to find a pattern in numbers. My dream came true. This shows the power of the dreams. So we should dream big usually.
Wow, wow. You know what? This is really interesting. So as a kid, you used to play it with the calculator to find patterns in numbers. Talk about foreshadowing, right? This is the very definition. It's funny because I used to be the IT person for my household when I was a kid. And, here I am in engineering and marketing focused on technology. So we are who we are, right? So when we talk about AI and we talk about technologies, I mean, since you and I were children, the technologies have come like a long, long way. And in the past, I heard that the definition of technology is anything that was invented after you were born. So that makes it technology for you, which is really interesting. And if you think about since you've been born, the amount of changes that we've seen as a society, for me, and of course, I'm about to date myself here, I've seen the microwave. Yes, yes, folks, I did go all the way back to the microwave, right? So I've seen the microwave invented, right? I've seen cell phones, Facebook, social media in general. And now you have artificial intelligence, augmented reality, all of that. Now, artificial intelligence has been around since really the 50s, but it's just really becoming more and more part of the lexicon of people in general. And it's really been on an interesting path. So, Samira, so we've seen so much change since we've been born. What would you say is one of the most interesting pieces of technology that you've seen come about since you've been born?
Interesting question. I clearly remember when there was a conversation around supercomputers because you want to do lots of compute, you need a huge supercomputer to do that. But then technology progress. Then I remember clearly people talking about the big data. My title at that time even was big data scientist. I couldn't recall any small data scientists, but because people amazed about how data could be massive, they use the big for the data. And then after that, I remember people talking about deep learning again. And at that time, all the problems people wanted to solve with deep learning and neural network. And now we are in the era of large language models. All of these basically super big, deep, and large. It shows the excitement of each technology. I really impressed actually about this new technology, generative AI and large language models. Although I'm sure that this is not the future of AI, this is very important part that steps that we take for processing the information. But still, I think there are much more excitement is coming.
Wow, it's interesting that you talk about what's coming, right? Because part of what's coming is the advent of, like you said, more supercomputing, right? So we're talking about quantum computing, right? And where we're talking about so really, really super fast processing big questions that, solving world hunger, like that type of thing, which is coming in the future. And these large language models, LLMs, the things that we're using for generative AI, is just I think the intro that a lot of people are thinking about, but they don't realize that really they've been using AI literally for decades already, right? Literally for decades. So if you think about people, if you're using Amazon like I am, right? You've been using AI because those are recommendation engines. If you've been watching Netflix, that's another form of AI. Talk to us, Samir, about what are some of the common things that businesses are doing with AI today that a lot of people don't even realize they're actually using AI to make that happen.
Yeah, as you said, AI is everywhere now, even when we don't notice that. So, Netflix is one example, as you mentioned. We look at all the data, basically historical data, to understand the pattern and recommend the best actions. Or even when you wanted to purchase something, you enter your credit card information, and behind the scene, in a very short amount of time, process multiple actually models to make a decision if the transaction want to approve or decline. Again, it's tied to every part of our life that help us to either make a decision better or gain more efficiency about the work that we are doing.
The thing is that a lot of companies, when they're thinking about what can we do with AI, right? When I go into a business and I say, okay, let's facilitate a use case for you. Let's figure out what are the best ways that you can use artificial intelligence, maybe for automation, for capacity building, or if you're using augmented reality, how can you create a more immersive consumer experience? It all starts with the use case, right? And I want to talk a little bit more about how we expand the possibility of use cases for businesses because people only know what they know. And this is where they bring in the experts to talk about, well, what's possible. I know that you have a framework that you look at in terms of how we can implement AI in a more lasting, sustainable, and effective way. So let's talk a little bit more about that. What is that? What is that framework? And what does that mean in terms of the science of putting all of this together?
So as you mentioned, so it's really good that companies understand the power of AI then and it started with the use cases. But if we just want to stay in that level, we become very technical and in the best case tactical. We never can unlock the full power of AI if we are not thinking about AI strategy. So the best way that if we wanted to define some sort of guideline is first we need to identify our goals. And these goals should fit in a bigger picture of the company. You shouldn't just do something because it's cool and everyone is doing that. It's need to solve a real problem for the businesses. It could be generating the revenue, it could be making things more efficient for your users, but we need to make sure that our AI solution is aligned with our business goals. This is the first step. But then there are many ways you can leverage AI. So you can build AI-centric products. You can enhance your product, your existing product with the smarter features. As you mentioned, we can optimize the operation. In each of these categories, you can leverage AI. And then you need to make sure that you have a right data because without the good quality data, so you cannot get anything out of your AI and models. But the challenge here also, I think it's very important that we first know what we wanted to accomplish. Because sometimes companies spend lots of resources and time to just first collect all the data that is possible and then build their AI solution. Imagine if you wanted to make a phone, so you never actually go first, collect all the raw materials, and then decided how the design is look like. You first design how you wanted, for example, to make this phone, and then based on that, you collect all the requirements. This is something that I have seen a lot, and the companies spend lots of time and money to collect the data, and then they wanted to start to decide what they wanted to do with that, which is not the very optimized way to approach it.
I've seen that myself because it's like, okay, let's get all the stuff, right? But then they don't realize, first of all right, first you have to figure out where the data is, what data you need, where the data is, and is the data clean? That last part about is the data clean is so, so important because I think we've all seen garbage in, garbage out, right? So if you have bad data, biased data, data that is incomplete, data that is incorrect, you do not want to train your very expensive model that you're going to spend a lot of time building in order to do that, right? So this is where we talk about these use cases, first defining the use case and then identifying what information you need for that use case and doing something small and manageable. What do you think about that, Samira? Because I mean, for me, I can't stress that enough with my clients that if you're going to test this, you want to test it with something where you can have some wins, where people can be excited about the outcome and the possibility. So, have you seen a situation where a company has just taken on too much too soon when they're trying to start AI?
Very important question. Yes, I have seen that a lot. Again, AI bring lots of capabilities, all of us super excited. But if you want to do everything at the first step, so usually you cannot accomplish your goals. You can have a vision that what you wanted to do, and always is good to have long-term vision, but it's important you divide it to the small, small pieces that is manageable And then you keep gradually add on rather than building the big actually structure at the beginning, which usually at the beginning, even you don't know what is the full picture look like. And you don't have any idea about that if this is fit your market or not. So you should have small pieces, divided your vision to the small pieces and gradually add on.
So, what do you think that when leaders are trying to implement AI, what do you think are maybe some of the key things that they should know before they launch?
So as we mentioned, it's important that we have a strategy, basically know what we wanted to accomplish.
Hmm.
Then also it's very important that we know that how we want to leverage AI, what is the purpose of leveraging AI. And then we wanted to make sure that we have a right data in place. Then the other part I would say that is very important is the resources, both from the, we did a, we know exactly what we wanted to do. It sounds like we have a plan. Now how we wanted to implement that plan. So you need to know what kind of tools you wanted to use, what is the right team. Having talented data scientists and AI engineer is essential, but is not enough. It's good because then this happened. That people just go and start to building a solution without having any plan or architecture design in place.
I think that that's really interesting. And so you're getting into one of these sort of the ideas of what are the best practices, right?
Yes.
What are the best practices? You mentioned the resources, right? Not just having a data scientist, data engineer. You also need to have some strategy on board for that. So, resources, one, scalability, right? Is this designed to scale and grow with your company? That would be number two. Modularity. You just mentioned that, right? Being able to move these pieces in different ways so that when you understand what you're trying to accomplish, and maybe you start with a small piece and then you move to that next thing that allows it to then scale and even travel to other parts of the business. And then baby steps, right? Baby steps. Now, one of the things we haven't mentioned yet, which is the elephant in the room, is responsible AI.
Yes.
Governance, right? Governance, ethics, making sure that your work is not biased. Can you talk a little bit about that, about what you've seen in this area of responsible AI, Samira?
Yes, actually is one of the most important parts. And we should make sure that, your AI solution is ethical, fair, transparent, and accountable. I want to give you an example. For example, you wanted to personalize the email that's sending to your prospect, and you want to use the information about this prospect. There are lots of things that we should take care of. How much we wanted to transfer the data, how you wanted to use that data. And if this data is using to train the model or all of this consideration, we need to think about that and plan for that.
So, having said all of that, I know that there's a lot of now work and classes and things like that around responsible AI so that people can think about this. And let's remember, folks, that the data is not inherently biased. What the data is being used for or what people are highlighting out of the information, that can then inadvertently affect someone. So, I had an interview with Donald Farmer in season one of my podcast. And that was an amazing interview. He's, a data strategist and he's worked with many companies on this AI transformation, but particularly focused around the area of data and AI. And he talked about a story in that episode of the podcast where there was a company that inadvertently discriminated against single parents. And in this case, the company, those were single mothers because a lot of the single parents working at that company happened to be women. And this was a manufacturing company, and in their scheduling, they used AI, and the AI optimized for people with the most flexibility. And generally, the people with the most flexibility is not a single parent, right? Because you have to be there for pickups and drop offs and dinner and all the things. And so they were able to realize that this was a problem and they were to go back into how the data was structured and how the model was trained in order to remove this bias. But, if no one paid attention or even cared to address it, it would have been a major problem, which would have affected their workforce. It would have affected the diversity of that team. And so that's just how these little breadcrumbs can, turn into something that really sort of rolls down and snowballs into something terrible at the end of the day that we need to pay attention to, right?
On the other side, I want to give you an example of how AI can actually help us to remove the bias. I was reading about the platform using for talent acquisition. And because they use AI agent to do the initial interviews, so they see the increase in the number of women that passing the interviews. And this gives more actually opportunity for women to present themselves.
Wow, that is fascinating. So, in this case, women are having better successes presenting to an AI agent rather than an actual person. That's unexpected. Okay. Look at that. So AI is not always the boogeyman in the room, right? Because I think right now a lot of people are just kind of like looking at it like, oh my God, it's this negative thing that's about to take over our lives. So that brings me to another point, right? When we start talking about things like quantum computing, I have a book coming out called the CMO's Guide to AI Marketing Transformation. And then there I talk about the evolution of AI. I talk about the different applications, but also what's coming. And what's coming is quantum computing. And with quantum computing, this is where, correct me if I'm wrong, because you're the expert on this, right? This is where you are processing large volumes of data to solve huge problems, trillions of questions being answered, essentially queries being answered at a time. So if anyone is a movie fan, you may remember The Terminator. Okay. And in the Terminator movie, we have Skynet. Skynet is the omnipotent AI that is basically annihilating all of the human race because Skynet has determined through its algorithms that we are the problem. Okay. That we need to be the ones that are removed from the planet. Do you think there will ever be such a thing as a Skynet? Maybe not evil and maniacal, but basically an AI that controls so much of what we're doing with defense, or maybe it's with food farming or something else. Do you think that we'll ever have something like that?
Honestly, I don't think we see something like a Skynet. But as you mentioned right now, AI all about helping humans make a better decision and solving real problems. However, we need to be careful how we develop AI. And we need to, as we mentioned before, strong ethics and safeguards about how we are training this model, how we want to actually use these models to make sure we doesn't go off track.
Wow. Well, I think we're going to leave it right there because I think that is the key thing, right? We have to be careful how we safeguard and train these AI models so that it doesn't go off the rails. Because I think that right now, some of the people who are leading the charge on AI and developing these generative models, these LLM models, they are already putting up the red flags. They're putting up the brakes. They're saying, hey, we need to slow down. We need regulation to catch up. And we need to be smarter about the way that we implement AI. So we're going to leave it on your last word, Samira. If anyone wants to find out more about you or to reach out to you, what is the best way to do that on this topic?
They can reach out to me on LinkedIn. Would love to hear their use cases, their challenges, and would love to help.
Fantastic. Well, folks, I hope you love this podcast. If you do, please subscribe to the channel, like, share it with others, especially if you're working to implement AI or thinking to implement AI in your organization. Do definitely subscribe to the 10X Blueprint podcast and check out my new book coming out. As I said, the CMO's Guide to AI Marketing Transformation. Till then, we'll see you on the next podcast. Thank you. Thank you for joining us on the 10X Blueprint podcast. If you found today's episode inspiring and want to stay ahead of the curve on the latest trends in AI, AR, and Web3, be sure to subscribe to our podcast and follow us on LinkedIn and YouTube at Brandiverse Marketing. Together, we'll unlock the blueprint for 10X growth. Don't miss out on our next episode, and until then, onward and upward.